Dr. Pritchard, welcome to Veridical.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me on, Jack.
Of course, yeah. I read your book, Epistemic Luck, and working on my thesis, it has been really, really helpful. And I realized I was neglecting the field of epistemology. I read a few Nagel essays, but that's about it. Other than your book and some essays here and there, I feel pretty young to the topic. So I'm excited to talk with you today. Why don't you first, though, tell us a little bit about your academic journey? What got you into academia? What enticed you about philosophy specifically? What brought you from being a high schooler to where you are now?
Yeah, it's a funny thing. I mean, where I grew up, nobody goes to university. So I don't know why, but for some reason at an early age, I had this idea that I wanted to be an academic, even though I didn't know anyone who went to university and know anything about academics, but the idea appealed to me. No subjects to narrow down yet, but just the thought of doing that kind of life appealed to me. And then when I did go to university to do English literature, I realized I then encountered philosophy for the first time, never encountered it before. And then I realized that what I was actually interested in books and so on was actually ideas, and that's where philosophy came in. So really, I was a philosopher specifically. So I feel like that's. Some people, it's just in their nature. It's like a temperamental thing. In fact, I have it with students all the time. I mean, I think anyone can take to philosophy, but there's a certain kind of person, the way they think, it just comes so naturally to them. But if they're so inclined, you could be a philosopher.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the route. And then epistemology, it's because I got into philosophy by learning about the problem of radical skepticism. And that intrigued me. And it's I ended up doing a lot of work on it, and so that I think that's. I mean, this is how I teach philosophy intro. Is try and convince people that there are lots of really deep problems about things that you think aren't problematic. Knowledge, time, morality, whatever you, and then. Not to give them answers, but to give them problems, because that's and the people who get excited by that, I think that's that you're on the path to philosophy now.
Sure. I worry that in philosophy, after you sort of get out of the freshman year, it can be really easy to there's always these questions that even people that aren't in academia, just your regular people that might be in other subjects or not even in academia at all, they might ask these questions. Well, how can we know anything, right? How can we have knowledge of anything? And my wife, she's in psychology and clinical counseling. And today she asked me, what are you going to talk to him about? And I said, well, we're going to talk about knowledge and whether you can have it. She looked at me like it was the damnest thing. She said, what do you mean can we have knowledge? And I said, I feel exactly the same, but it wasn't until my professor proposed some Gettier problems to me. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about Edmund Gettier and what a Gettier problem is. And after walking away from some of these Gettier problems, specifically I'm thinking of the stopped clock one, I walked away from that thinking, oh, I'm just going to suppress this, right? Of course I know what time it is. I don't need to worry about this. I live my practical life like I have knowledge. But I kind of just introduced some concepts there. Can you tell us a little bit about Edmund Gettier and sort of what a Gettier problem is
Sure.
And what this does to the idea of knowledge itself?
Sure. First off, it might be useful to listeners just to distinguish between two things. Like, so on the one hand, there's the question, like, what is knowledge? And as we'll talk about in a moment, the Gettier problem is really about that. And then there's a question about whether we have any knowledge. And it could be that we have lots of knowledge, but we just don't know what it is. They're separate questions, but they tend to go together. Like if you're not sure what something is, then it's natural to worry about whether you have any of it. But they're not quite the same. So one issue which Gettier gets to is, do we even know what it is? We feel like we know what it is. I mean, this is often the way with philosophy. You start thinking about something, whether it be time, morality, or existence or something, and you feel like you know exactly what it is. And then when you start to think about it, you realize you don't. And knowledge is a bit like that. So, I mean, we focus on propositional knowledge. That's knowledge of a fact, knowledge that something is the case. A lot of our knowledge is like, not all of our knowledge, some of our knowledge is like an ability knowledge, like know-how, knowing how to ride a bike and so on. But some of it is factual, knowing the answer to a question, or knowing that Paris is the capital of France, or what have you.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to something like that, one requirement seems to be that what you know has to be true.
Mm-hmm.
You can't know a falsehood. You can think you know a falsehood, but you don't really know a falsehood, right? If it turns out that it's false, you didn't actually know it. You have to believe it. So that's like a sort of bare minimum, like you. I mean, what you think about this is like an archer, you've got the archer firing the arrow of belief, and a bare minimum for knowledge is the arrow's got to hit the truth, right? That's what the belief is fired
Mm-hmm.
at the truth. Your beliefs, you hope, are true, but if they are true, then they're in the market for knowledge. So true belief, hitting the target, is necessary for knowledge. But then what else is necessary? Because you can hit a target through dumb luck,
Mm-hmm.
no skill whatsoever, and it could be the same with true belief. Someone just randomly believes true beliefs. Maybe they're very gullible or suggestible or whatever it might be, but they end up with lots of true beliefs, but they don't know anything. So what marks the difference there? Well, one answer might be justification. I mean, this goes right back to the ancients. You get it in Plato version of this. Knowledge is, back then, it's true opinion with an account. But as we would say, true belief with a justification, with some story, which can explain why, a good story about why you think that's true. So, someone who just forms their belief through guesswork or gullibility or whatever, they don't have a good reason as to what they believe. But, like someone who has expertise, for example, they do have a good reason. Or someone who's checked the answer,
Mm-hmm.
or they've
Yeah.
seen the answer for themselves, and they've got a good reason. So it's good reasons, true belief plus good reasons, it gives you knowledge. And that seems like a pretty good view. But then Gettier comes along. And Gettier shows that it can't be right. And it's quite interesting because normally in philosophy you have these counterexamples, and it's kind of up for grabs whether the counterexample is effective or not.
Mm-hmm.
But Gettier is one of these counterexamples that pretty much everyone agrees is effective. And what he says is, look, you can have a justified belief and it's true, but what if the truth of the belief has nothing to do with your justification? I mean, it could still be the case that your belief is only true as a matter of luck.
Mm-hmm.
And there's various examples. So these aren't Gettier's own examples, but they're structurally the same. So you mentioned the stop clock. I suppose I just happen to look at a clock that's broken the one time in the day when it's showing the right time. Well, I get a true belief from the clock, and I've got a justification.
Mm-hmm.
It's a clock, right? But it's not, I don't know the time. You can't come to know what the time is by looking at a stop clock, even if you end up with a true belief.
Mm-hmm.
Or another famous example is the farmer in the field looks into the field and sees what they think is one of their sheep. And so they believe there's a sheep in the field. But what they're looking at is not one of their sheep. It's like some sheep-shaped object, a big hairy dog or a rock
Yeah.
covered in moss that looks like a sheep. Here's the thing, though, hidden from view behind the thing they're looking at is a sheep, one of their sheep. So there is a sheep in the field, but the truth of their belief has nothing to do with their, their justification.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. So it seems what you've got in these cases is not knowledge. You're just too lucky. You just got to the truth through luck. And it seems like even though you've got a justification, you've got truth, there's a kind of disconnect between your justification and your true belief, such that it's still just a matter of luck you've got to the truth. So you're no better off really than someone guessing.
Yeah. I was very fortunate. I took a Kripke seminar, and I attend a conservative Catholic university, which is funny because I am not a conservative Catholic, but they have a good philosophy program, and so they offered
usually
a
do.
Kripke. Yeah, right. And they offered a Kripke class, and as you can imagine, no students were that excited. So it was a graduate level course, and it was me and then two undergrads. So it was three of us in the class for the Kripke class, and I do analytic philosophy, but I mostly hang out in the ethics field, and so I was not ready for a Kripke class, but it was one of the most productive classes I ever had. But the reason I bring this up is I recall reading one of his essays, and it's sort of escaping me right now, but I remember him talking about a red barn, and I believe that was analogous to a Gettier problem. Are you familiar with what I'm talking about?
Yeah, these are his famous Nozick bashing lectures, they're so called. So there's a guy called Robert Nozick, and he had a very famous book out And
Yeah, that was the essay with Robert Nozick on knowledge. Yes.
yeah, that's right.
Now it's
Yeah,
coming
so
back to me.
these are very famous. They only got published relatively recently, but the lectures are a long time ago. Lots of people were there. Apparently, Kripke was very much enjoying himself, bashing. They were just called the Nozick bashing lectures, just
Oh,
coming up with
wonderful.
counterexamples to Nozick's view. But yeah, the Red Barn. I mean, that's a variation of a case where I can't remember how it goes, but the rough idea is something like you know it's a barn, but you don't know it's. Was it you know it's a red barn, but you don't know it's a barn, or something like it's something like that, isn't
Yeah,
it?
I think all the barns are not real barns. They're just buildings painted red or something like that, but they're not actually barns. And then you happen to see a red barn and you think it's a red barn, but unbeknownst to you, it really actually is a red barn in a field
Yeah.
of not actual real barns. And so you come to believe that you're looking at a red barn, and you technically are, but you shouldn't. It's sort of almost a little bit unjustified. And yeah, all these sort of contribute to this idea of, yeah, what is knowledge should be justified to a certain extent. But then it begs the question of, can we ever really be justified? Because if looking at a clock doesn't give you real knowledge of time, how could anyone be justified? So my question now is, do you believe we can have knowledge? Do you believe it's possible to have knowledge to any degree that's practical or relevant?
Well, as I say, Gideon cases, they don't undermine the thought that you have knowledge. They what they show is that maybe we're not so straight. Maybe we don't know exactly what knowledge is.
Mm.
But of course,
Mm.
I mean, the Gideon cases only show that you don't have knowledge in those particular cases, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't follow that you don't get knowledge generally from looking at clocks, just not from stock clocks, and
Mm-hmm.
so on. And it's not that you have to always verify that a clock hasn't stopped before you can get knowledge from it. I mean, that might be one response,
Yeah.
but that doesn't seem to follow. It's just so long if it has stopped, it's not a route to knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
But if it hasn't, but if it's working, then that would be a route to knowledge. So I think you do know lots of things, or at least the Gettier problem in itself doesn't show we don't know lots of things. There are other arguments that might seem to show that.
Yeah. And that's exactly where we're going to go right now. Because when I first learned what a radical skeptic was, I sort of, like I said earlier, I sort of brushed it aside. The whole, how do we know we're not a brain in a vat? How do we know we're not in a simulation? How do we know? I think another common one is, there's a guy behind you, but every time you turn around to look at him, he evades your eyesight, and no one else can see him. There's no way to prove this, and there's no way to disprove it, though. And so my question is what is a radical skeptic, and do they actually pose a legitimate threat to knowledge, or do epistemologists in the field of philosophy sort of brush them aside a little bit? Or is it a legitimate problem, and it causes a lot of anxiety among you epistemologists? Is it of concern?
It is, yeah. I mean, it's worth, excuse me, mentioning. Excuse me. Sorry. It's worth mentioning that there's a long history, skeptical history, and it appears in multiple forms. I mean, going right back to the inception of philosophy, there are skeptical trains of thought, and in fact, skepticism begins really as an ethical position. It begins with the Pyrrhonians, for example, in ancient Greece. It's the idea that that reason actually undermines our flourishing. We flourish through doubt. In fact, the word skeptic doesn't mean doubt. The original meaning, Greek, it means to inquire. The ancient Greek skeptics were people, they inquired without end. The idea was to inquire dogmatically. You never conclude. You never reach any conclusion. So it's kind
Never
of, it's like
satisfied.
it's like a doubt-driven inquiry of uncovering things. And one of the problems they faced was, how do you live your skepticism? You want to maximize your doubt, but of course you can't doubt everything, because then you cease to, you can't get up in the morning, you can't do stuff. I mean, what the joke about the Pyrrhonians is that, and Pyrrho himself, was if they didn't stop him, he would walk into volcanoes, or he'd walk off rooftops and things like that, because he didn't believe anything, right?
Yeah.
But so what they used to do is say, well, certain things I doubt, some things I don't doubt. They try and partition them off. So that meant that their skepticism was never completely radical, because it was a lived view.
Mm-hmm.
And then fast forward to the early modern period with Descartes, skepticism takes on a whole new dimension, because Descartes starts to think of skepticism in methodological terms. So it's not a position. It's not something, we don't think of it as something where you have to try and live it, like the ancient skeptics did. It's rather a way of, as it were, testing our theory of knowledge. And that's the way Descartes does it in the meditation. So the thought is we want to find the certain foundations for our knowledge, and we do that by maximizing the doubt, radicalizing the doubt, and seeing what can resist that doubt. So it's like a test. It's like a hurdle that one should clear, And the problem is that Descartes' radical skepticism was more persuasive to people than his response to the skepticism that he.
Yeah.
Right? So the radical skepticism now lives on, and that's basically the contemporary version. And it's this idea, roughly, that we can imagine that the world. I mean, I'll go straight for the most contemporary version, which is like the Brain-Navat type version. We could imagine the world indistinguishable from how it is now, but where we're radically deceived. So that's the thing about like the Matrix, brains in vats, and things like that. Everything you experience is subjectively indistinguishable. Like I would have the experiences of talking to you, sitting here, and so on, but I wouldn't actually be sitting here talking to you. I'm floating in a vat of nutrients, being fed these experiences by supercomputers or whatever. And so the starting point there is, well, given that they're indistinguishable, it seems like I've got no way of knowing I'm not in that position. But if I was in that position, then of course I wouldn't know many of the things I take myself to know. Like I take myself to know that I'm in Irvine right now in Southern California. But what if I'm a brain in a vat floating around on Alpha Centauri? That's one of Nozick's examples, actually. So if I'm a brain of vat floating around Alpha Centauri, well then I can't, not only do I not know that, that I'm hearing everything, but I don't know I'm in Irvine, right? Because I'm not in Irvine. Can't know a falsehood, right? So lots of things I believe would be false. So I don't know them. So I don't know very much. So it's not just that I don't know this kind of extreme fact that I'm not a brain in a vat. The thought is, if I can't know that, then I can't know all these other things either. I can't know that I'm sitting here. I don't know I've got hands. Brains in vats don't have hands. I don't know I'm in Irvine. I don't know I'm sitting down because brains in vats don't sit down. They float and so on. There's lots of things I can't know. So it looks like I don't know anything unless I can rule this thing out. But I can't rule it out because it's indistinguishable. So that's kind of the radical problem in a nutshell.
Yeah. Do you think there's a positive counter argument against the radical skeptics? Do you think there's a response that you can give them? Is there such thing as here's a good reason why you're probably not a brain in a vat, or is this just something that we're doomed to be anxious of?
Yeah, you can respond to it. In fact, I'm fairly confident there is a response. But so I should say I'm what's called a Wittgensteinian about these things. So Wittgenstein
sort of ignore it.
Well, yeah. Well, that's the wrong way to think about it. I would say the wrong way, but that is a popular way of thinking about it. I mean, I think Wittgenstein's view is a bit more subtle than that. What Wittgenstein thinks is that philosophical problems they arise because we invest sort of false pictures into our ways of thinking. So that's part of what philosophy does. Is we have ordinary practices. We don't really reflect on what we do, and then when we start to reflect on them as philosophers, we start to abstract away from the detail of the ordinary practice, and we start to add in extra elements. We don't even notice we're doing it. And these sort of pictures, these faulty philosophical pictures, start to get in there. And they're what's creating the problem. I think it's the same radical skepticism. And so what we have to do is we have to, as it were, unpick our way back. We have to find our way back, as it were. We've got to find the source of the faulty picture that was creating the problem, and then that's going to lead us out of it.
Yeah.
And I think in the case of radical skepticism, I think there's at least two faulty pictures in play, which makes it even more complicated. I'll tell you. Well, let me tell you about one of them. I don't know if I can try and tell you about both, but let me tell you about one of them, which is very much Wittgenstein. It's the idea that we can evaluate all of our beliefs at once it looks like a harmless idea. But I think what Wittgenstein in his final notebooks on certainty is trying to get us to see is that that's actually just a dubious philosophical picture. It's not a coherent picture to have. There
The
is
idea
no
that we
such
can look
thing.
at all of our thoughts at once, a web of
Yeah,
beliefs.
that we can rationally
Hmm.
evaluate
Hmm.
everything at once. I mean, this
Yeah,
is in
yeah.
Descartes, right? I mentioned this transition. The ancients don't try to do this, but they don't try to do it because skepticism is a live position. Descartes suddenly does try to do it because skepticism isn't a left position anymore, it's methodological. And he
Hmm.
has this lovely metaphor in the Meditations where he's talking about Pyrrhonism and he's saying, the Pyrrhonians, he has this metaphor of the beliefs being like apples. And the Pyrrhonians inspect the apples one by one. He says, no, I'm going to tip out the barrel. All the apples are out, and then only let them back in once they've checked them. So that's how he differentiates himself from the ancients. So that's the idea. Like you evaluate everything all at once. And
Hmm.
it looks like a harmless idea. It looks like, well, why can't you? Right? Why can't you just extend the scope of your rational evaluation so it takes in everything? And I think Wittgenstein tries to get us to see that's a faulty picture.
Hmm.
And he does that, I think, by showing us how it's built into what it is to be a rational person that undertakes rational evaluations, that you have these basic certainties in place, is what he calls hinge certainties. Roughly, you have to have a certainty in one's worldview before one can even start to begin the game of doubt.
Yeah.
And that's not because it's not because we don't follow through on our doubt, or we're not consistent enough or something. This isn't like an incidental lack. It's a logical lack, right? I mean, it's a logical restriction. So, so this certainty that he thinks is like a framework certainty, that certainty is what enables rational evaluations to take place.
Hmm.
So the
And
certainty can't
this would be
itself.
the cogito, right? That is the certainty.
No. So yeah. So no. For I mean, Descartes' way of skepticism was the cogito, and sure
Okay.
he appeals to certainty. Wittgenstein is completely different. The certainty is mundane and everyday. It's like the mundane everyday
Hmm.
certainty that infuses
Hmm.
our worldview. So it's not theoretical. It's not philosophical. In fact, if Wittgenstein doesn't think there's we can or should be certain of anything philosophical. Certainty is where it's in our actions. We reveal our certainty in the way that we say. He quotes at one point approvingly Goethe in the beginning was the deed.
Hmm.
The certainty is infused in our actions, and that's the
Hmm.
kind of certainty that interests him. And this is a certainty which is irrational, it's primitive, it's visceral, and so on. That certainty is irrational, it's not grounded, but it provides the foundation against which we can make sense of rational evaluations. And hence it follows whatever it is to be rational, it's not
Hmm.
to rationally evaluate everything at once. It's always to rationally evaluate one part of it relative to some other part.
Yeah. 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 And it sort of builds up from there, I guess. You sort of will never get the complete picture of all your beliefs, but you can at least do one at a time, perhaps.
Well, I mean, what follows is just that what it is to be rational is what it is to rationally evaluate and be a rational subject is to do it locally.
Hmm.
Um, so that's what he's trying to get us to see, that there's a faulty
Hmm.
picture there,
Yeah. Yeah.
and the aspiration to that picture is there's nothing in ordinary practices that licenses or anything like that. This is like a philosophical idea that's been it's kind of like a presupposition that's been infused into our ways of thinking here, and that's the thing we have to unpick. So that's what I mean about
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
These are often this is the case of philosophical problems. It's not like they have here's an argument that says someone says not P, here's an argument for P.
Hmm.
Usually philosophical resolutions, they involve trying to make sense of how everything fits together in a new way. And I think in Wittgenstein's case, that's even more radical still, because it's trying to see how philosophy is, as it were, both the disease and the cure.
Hmm. Hmm. I understand. Yes. So earlier, when you opened up, you were talking about how we can sometimes have knowledge, but have that knowledge I don't want to misquote because I can already see the problems with me saying this. We can think we have knowledge and maybe we have a true belief, but it might not be knowledge because we acquired it on luck. And this would be sort of the Gettier problems is you got the right belief, the time is 2 in the afternoon, but you only
Yeah,
believe that out of luck. You got lucky by looking at a broken clock that was broken at 2 o'clock.
yeah,
And now that I'm thinking of it, even the radical skeptics could also be victims to luck. Any proposition that they use, and you're having rationality or having some form of certainty as a baseline to even begin to make the proposition that of a skeptical proposition, even that might be based on something that is also a matter of luck. What is your engagement with the idea of luck and knowledge? You open your book mentioning that it's an intuitive belief that knowledge and luck are not compatible. But it seems that, and in a lot of areas of life, luck is unavoidable. This ended up being one of my sort of the thesis of my thesis was that luck is infectious, and no matter where you go, no matter where you hide, you won't be able to escape luck. And I engage with your work a lot because it seems that when people are trying to avoid luck, not just in the moral sense, but just in any sense, anytime anyone's trying to avoid luck, they do what Niall Levy and others refer to as the retreat to the inner citadel, which is retreat to the constitutive makeup, who one is on the inside and what one can believe. And so they think that by going at least to inside themselves, there they have the most control, and therefore luck is the most absent. How do you feel that luck plays into ideas in epistemology and knowledge and beliefs? What's your engagement with luck?
So one thing I would say is that there is a danger. I mean, maybe I was going back to say it was a danger, but then maybe it's also a beacon in some senses. But the danger would be of thinking of the epistemic case by analogy with the moral case, because a lot of what you just said, I think, applies very much to the moral case. In the moral case, we often want to have some domain of moral assessment, which is luck resistant, because there's something abhorrent to the idea that your moral evaluation depends on luck. But that's because we might think that the moral evaluation, or at least this kind of moral evaluation anyway, is like a sort of purely internal matter. It's not something that ought to be hostage to how the world is or how your relationships that you stand to the world. I don't accept that, by the way, but I can see why someone might think that way. In epistemology, or certainly when we're talking about knowledge, we're already talking about a relationship that we stand in to a world external to us, to facts that are outside of our control. So, so it's already the case that, inevitably, when because it's all about standing in a certain kind of objective relations to the world, to facts, your agency saying those relations to facts, it's inevitably the case that, first off, responsibility can't just be about you, right? It's got to be because it's about your relationship to the world.
Yeah, it's normative.
Purely internal. But also, of course, inevitably, as with any causal explanatory story about how you get to the truth, luck might play some role, right?
Yeah.
And that would be fine. Even in the cases of where luck's undermining, what makes it undermining isn't the mere presence of luck. It's the fact that luck is doing all the explanatory work. Like in say the stop clock case, what explains why you have a true belief? It's nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
And it's nothing to do with the clock working, right? What explains the true belief is the luck, or the sheep case. What explains is not that you saw the sheep, because you didn't. It's not that you're good at sheep spotting, because you're not. Well, you may well be, but in this case, it's not playing any part. What's doing the explaining is just the happenstance. There's a sheep in from view. So it's not as it were luck that's it's not that we're looking for something where luck is purely eliminated in the knowledge case. We're just looking for something where luck isn't playing the overarching explanatory role in your cognitive success. And so it strikes me that's a bit different than in the moral case. The moral case, the idea of luck getting in there at all, I think that's the intuition. As I say, not one intuition I buy, but the kind of people you mentioned there, or this kind of Kantian worry about, it's this idea of the Kantian diamond, isn't it? You get back to
Yes,
something
the
which is
jewel passage,
impervious.
yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That I think that thought is one where luck gets no purchase at all, and there's
Mm-hmm.
not even a temptation to think that. I think in the epistemic case.
Yeah, this has sort of been, and I think you'll disagree, but yeah, I'm starting. What I fear is a lot of times when we evaluate a situation, we sort of bracket it off temporally. So whatever came before might not apply, and whatever comes after might not apply, and we're sort of chipping away a lot of these contingent factors and then looking at it just sort of in isolation. My problem is that when we chip away or exclude some prior section, there would be a causal chain that sort of is relevant to whatever event is going on, and sort of whatever moral event is happening as well. And I believe when we take a sort of a complete picture of the world, it's sort of hard for me to escape. I'm only 26 years old, so I don't have firm opinions on any of these things, but it's hard for me. The arguments of determinism are very hard for me to rebut. And so I think ideally I would love to be a compatibilist, or I wish for a world where libertarianism is feasible, but it's just hard for me to disagree with determinism. And in that sense, it's hard for me to not see how luck would always be playing an overarching role in anything. It's hard for me to not be able to trace back any bit of knowledge or any belief system and not wind the clock back enough to find a moment where, boom, that's where the luck is. And I think this luck is at play in our thoughts and our beliefs and how we act even before we're born. Just the mere fact that we were the lucky sperm in the race, and so it's hard for me to not. It's hard for me to sort of escape that intuition. And so you're right, I guess, for people, and I align a lot with Niall Levy. I don't know if you've engaged with a lot of his work or read a lot of his work, but he's influenced me a lot. He was on the podcast as well, and
Great.
yeah, and so, but yeah, his thesis is pretty radical. It's that luck undermines everything. And so, what would you say to that idea, that wind the clock back enough, you'll find an instance where luck sets something in motion, and later on you thought you had control, but it's only because you were isolating that event.
So before we get to that, I'm kind of intrigued by what you said about determinism there. I wonder whether maybe there's two notions of luck in play, because it would seem to me that if the world is completely determined, then nothing really is lucky. I mean, it's not your responsibility. There's no moral responsibility either. So, I mean, we might think luck is just something that takes away your responsibility. And in that sense, okay, it's taking away your responsibility. But it doesn't seem to be what takes away your responsibility is the luck, I would say in that case. It's the fact that there's no agency. Right?
Yeah.
That's I mean, by the way, I'm with you on that. I don't think there is a good solution to the problem of free will at all.
Okay. So good. Yeah. So it's good that we're in the same boat there. Real quick, to sort of explain myself, when I was my final paper from my Kripke class was actually, I wrote on future contingents, and I sort of bit off more than I could chew because I was not familiar with really much of any of that work. And so, but I was interested in future contingents because I'm a big Derek Parfit guy, and he talks about future people and the identity problem. But one of my distinctions was Kripke proposed, or maybe he supported the idea that there was what he called branching time semantics, and that when we come to a point, there's two different ways the world could go, and the choice we make determines what branch we go down. And so the world sort of just splits into these branches. And some other philosophers, their names are escaping me, and I think Kripke engaged with them, was the idea of a sort of a chosen path, or I guess you could call it a determined path. So here's all these branches. When you make a decision, that splits into two more branches, and you make another decision, and that splits into two branches. But there is one branch that is sort of, you could think of it as like highlighted, and it's the way the world will go. But what I distinguished was, from our positions as humans, we are epistemically limited by our minds. We can't see the chosen branch or the highlighted branch in all these different arrays of the way the world will go. So for us and our epistemic limitations, it everything looks contingent. Everything looks sort of up in the air on how things will go. But it might not. I mean, in reality, outside of the human experience, it would have always happened this way. But because we can't know that, we sort of our lived experience is that of, I guess you could call it, it feels like libertarianism. And so that's how I would, when you mentioned
Yeah.
earlier, it seems like there'd be nothing lucky at all. I agree. There wouldn't be no luck, except for our ignorant position. It
Yeah.
feels like
I mean,
luck.
exactly. I mean, yeah. So that would be exactly what I would say. Like, there's not really any luck. In a sense,
Yeah.
it'd be kind of like our experience of the world would be a fiction which arises from our incomplete information about it.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, it's nothing like. But in fact, it's even worse than that, because like we sort of picture ourselves as agents interacting with the world. I mean, it's like the incomplete idea. You know, that implies that there's sort of an incomplete agency in play. But of course, if determinism is true,
Mm-hmm.
I would say there's no agency at all,
Yeah.
right? Because because whatever agency is, it's the sort of thing that requires freedom, and I don't say it's compatible with determinism.
So you're a
that just strikes me.
determinist.
No, I'm a Mysterian. Do you know this view?
No, I know compatibilism, libertarianism, and determinism. I know the three.
So Mysterians say, look, there are some philosophical problems that just there is no. I don't think we can get our head around the solution. So
are there writings on this?
I think Colin McGinn held this view at one point. I think others did. I mean, I just find that every response that I've read to skepticism, to free will skepticism, or free will, yeah, the free will issue, I just think is really bad. You know, like the idea that, there's this idea like, even if determinism's true, it doesn't matter, because as long as you have the world that you want, or something like that, as long as so they move everything to second order. As long as it's second order, you endorse what you're doing, then it's free. But of course, if determinism's true, then it's second order. You don't have any control of what you're doing either. So it kind of moves the problem elsewhere. But like we're just as lacking in agency at second order. So it's just because it's second order doesn't make it suddenly like of a different kind of thing. So
irrelevant. Yeah.
I find that I think some problems, philosophical problems, they don't really permit of solutions, and sort of intellectual humility requires us to recognize that maybe they're beyond us. Chomsky thinks this, by the way. Yeah, Chomsky.
Okay.
There you go. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Very popular.
But going back to you, but let's suppose we're free. I think we can't help but think we're free anyways. Let's suppose we're free.
Yeah, we feel free. It feels that way.
Exactly. We feel free. However that's going to be worked out. You're absolutely right, going back to your original question, that when we make these judgments of responsibility, we carve off. They are, as we would say in epistemology, basis relative. So we carve off the initial conditions, and everything before that gets kicked away. So here's how it works in epistemology. I mean, here's a famous example from Unger. I just happened, let's suppose I'm walking down the corridor, I just happened to be outside the office door, my chair, at a certain moment in time where he's on the phone, and I overhear some juicy bit of gossip. It's lucky that I am where I am to hear that. But given that I am where I am to hear that, it's not now lucky that I get a true belief on that basis, right? So it's like there's luck in the initial conditions, but given that I'm in those conditions now, it's not a matter of luck that I exploit that opportunity and come to know something. And when we do epistemology, that's the kind of luck we want excluded. We want exclude. It's not luck in the initial conditions. That's fine. You can have as much luck there as you want, but it's when you're in that moment where the basis is triggered, your basis for your belief is triggered. It can't now be a matter of luck that you get to the truth. Yeah. And I think we often do something like that in morality as well.
Yeah.
It gets a bit more complicated, but like, and it also it seems a little bit more artificial and unfair. But you know, we evaluate you, and I would say, by the way, this is the sort of McIntyre mistake about ethics, but we can get back to that if you want. But the modern world, in any case, evaluates you at this time slice view. So you know, the drunk driver. We don't think about, you know, character doesn't come into it, right? It's like
Yeah.
at that moment in time, you were drunk, you drove.
Yep.
Now,
You
boom, you
can't
got to pay the
say, "Hey,
consequences.
my parents made me start drinking when I was 14 and I just became an alcoholic
Yeah,
early." That's not a defense in court.
yeah. And even when
Yeah.
they do that, like it's just trying to expand the scope. It's not, as it were, getting back to what I think is a better idea, which is ideas of character.
Mhm.
Once you start talking about character, rather than so, this is less. It's less about like moral actions. It's judgments of
Mhm.
people and
Yeah.
traits, and
Would you
and
say
now
that that's a little bit Kantian, where Kant says we need to judge the intentions, not the outcomes?
yeah, I don't
Or
think
do you
it's
think
that
it's
because
different?
I think it's Aristotelian.
Hmm.
So or it's very ancient anyway. Everything in the ancient world is about character. This idea of judging actions independently of character. I don't think it even occurs to them really,
Hmm.
and that comes later. And even with even with Kant, the intentions, as it were, are meant to be. They're of the moment too. I mean, maybe they arise because of character, or
Hmm.
whatever. But we evaluate them in the moment. Um, Whereas the evaluations of character, this is a lifetime. That seems to be the right way to do our moral evaluations. But it's a completely
Mhm.
different way of thinking to
Yeah.
the to this other modern way of thinking about morality,
Yes.
which is action based. And
Hmm.
once you focus on
And
actions
results based. Yeah.
and results based, exactly. And I think it probably. I mean, there's different hypotheses about this, but I mean, I like the McIntyre. I don't know if you know the after virtue McIntyre
I've
diagnosis.
my
I
paper
think that's tremendously clever
my paper
as a
that I
diagnosis.
used to my term paper that I used to get I just got accepted into a PhD program for this fall, and
Ah.
my sample writing was a just a complete evisceration of Anscombe and McIntyre. So it was a
Ah.
huge critique of virtue ethics, and so
Okay, okay,
I sort of I
good.
went a little violent in it, but someone told me
Well,
that division.
if you're in a conservative Catholic place, then I guess
Yeah.
it's very tempting to go the other way, right? Uh,
It was, and
but
someone said that division is really it sells good in academia right now, and I said I
oh
don't
yeah, I'm
think I
sure.
like that, but I'm desperate to get in somewhere, so I'll write something against. But yes, but yeah, I was really I did I enjoyed McIntyre's diagnosis of our current moral predicament. I mean, his idea that we're all be acting emotivists, even people who don't think they're ethical emotivists are acting like it. And for those that aren't familiar, ethical emotivism is just that when you make a moral claim, you're really just expressing how you feel about it. So when you say murder is wrong, really what you're just saying is I don't like murder. And that's not a I don't yeah, I'm really disturbed by ethical emotivism. And so I enjoyed his diagnosis. I appreciated that. I want to
I
stay
was thinking
on.
more
Oh yeah, let
of
me hear.
the historical, like like he says that this in the early modern period, the new science proceeds by denying the Aristotelian metaphysics, which is true.
Hmm.
The Aristotelian metaphysics of powers and so on, powers inherent in objects that we can't see. We have the new observational method and so on. So the idea is the new sciences have developed and made their progress by denying their underlying Aristotelianism.
He opens
And
the book talking
so
about this great catastrophe,
the great
and we're just
catastrophe
like
is, and it's a
picking up
very
remnants.
because the scientists in the early modern period, their philosophy, there is no distinction between philosophy and science. The big intellectuals of the day are all polymaths. They
Hmm.
think there's going to be a new science of ethics, just like there's a new science of physics, and so it's a very natural thought. Let's just get rid of the Aristotelian ethics as well. Get rid of all the stuff about character. Let's just have this, let's focus on the act and let's come up with these principles and try and churn them out, and like have it all operationalized. And that's where we are today, I think. But yeah, I mean, his line is you can't do that. I
Hmm.
think
Yeah.
I think so. Like these like trolley problems and things like this, the moral
Hmm.
responsibility. I think they reveal there's like deep fault lines in our thinking about morality because we've jettisoned this idea of character.
Hmm.
Anyway, I'm
So,
probably getting off topic for your podcast.
no. So I mostly focus on ethics, and so I plan on steering this conversation towards ethics. Well, your bio on UC Irvine doesn't really mention a whole lot about ethics, but I think everyone has views on ethics, and I think it would be impossible to have views on epistemology and not also have ethical
Mhm.
views. In fact, my question, my question that I've written down here is, what is epistemic luck, which we've already answered. But then the question after that is, and how should morality and society adapt to accommodate your views on epistemic luck? Do so I'll share my conclusion, and you might have you probably almost certainly have a different one. But my view is that, yeah, like I mentioned earlier, luck is sort of parasitic and sort of just infests everything. And so, but we have uh rational reasons to continue our criminal justice system. This is it, if someone's a danger to society, you still remove them. And
Yeah.
Neil Levy and Galen Strawson, who I was really influenced by, and Michael Zimmerman. All these people really, I found them really persuasive to me, and sort of their idea is that we just need to remove the retributive aspect of this, right? We can still punish people technically, and there might be deterrents in our punishments that will keep people at bay. But because luck is undergirding everything, we just need to remove our notions of revenge. And one of my key points is that even if uh, luck is not at play, even if it would still probably be helpful to remove the retributive aspect of these things. But I'm curious what your view is, given your views on epistemology and beliefs and moral epistemology. How do you think society should accommodate your theories? Because one thing, and last thing I'll say is, me and when Neil Levy was on, I mentioned to him, I love analytic philosophy. I love reading the books. I love all this stuff. It just feels useless if it's not making the world a better place. And any philosophy in the world of ethics or something like that, we should be able to try to find a way to make it at least possible, maybe not practical, but at least possible to be applied. So yeah, I'm curious what your how your epistemology has informed your moral philosophy.
So yeah, just I'll start off with that point about justice. So I mean, I take one of the morals to be of all that moral. There, I think there are two moral luck debates, and they get run together. The Nagel type stuff, which is where the justice, this is like the drunk driver cases or resultant luck. I think one of the morals of that is there may be reasons why justice is unfair. In the sense that even if there's no moral difference between the two drivers, I mean, however we want. I mean, like I say, I have doubts about how you even draw that in this modern framework. I think that's part of the issue we're getting at, is it's really difficult to even make sense of the notion. But even so, it seems like that's one question. But there's a separate question. I think we should keep separate, which is a legal question. I mean, clearly, the drunk driver who kills somebody is there's a crime there that isn't there in the other case. There's drunk driving still a crime. It's not a crime. There's no manslaughter crime. So there are elements to what it is for criminal justice, and so which depend upon the way the world is and your relationship to it, external factors. And then I think you'd have to accept that when it comes to justice, it won't be fair. So you've got justice there separated from morality, which is kind of interesting. And that would support the sort of view you have of, maybe it is appropriate to treat the drunk driver who kills someone worse than the other one, not for moral reasons, but for other reasons. So you separate the two out, and that would lead to a different view about how you think about the justice system. None of my stuff in epistemology relates to that, though. I mean, there's more of a connection with the other moral luck problem, which is the Michael Williams stuff, which is, I think, for me, is much more interesting.
The Gauguin thought experiment.
So I take it what he's after is what I call authenticity risk. So he calls it moral luck. It's really moral risk, but I think it's not even, again, use the word moral is not even that helpful there, because he doesn't mean morality in the way we normally mean it. I think he means something like authenticity.
Yeah.
It's the challenge we all have to, I mean, each one of us faces this. If we want to live lives true to our values, true to the things that we care about most deeply and fundamentally, we're going to have to make decisions where we don't know how things are going to turn out. The Gauguin case is an extreme, but it illustrates the point. So the Gauguin does something terrible. He abandons his family to pursue his artistic ambitions, but we make sense of this. We don't make sense of it morally, I don't think. Morally, he's nothing much going for Gauguin. But the idea, well, that's a life. That's an authentic life. Mm-hmm. The art was great. In fact, we have it on a copy of one of his paintings on our walls. The Tahiti ones, actually. So you can say, well, there's some, what it is to lead a good life isn't just to be assessed morally. There's more to it than that. Very ancient idea, And again, and then we evaluate people's lives in the round. We don't just evaluate them morally. And then if you accept that, then you can accept that there's certain kinds of assessments that go in there. All of us have to make these decisions if we live flourishing lives, and then we don't think it's going to turn out. And of course, the other big example again is sometimes it doesn't turn out. Anna Karenina, but she had to do it. If she hadn't done it, the opportunity cost is great as well. Her life is bad. She's just, unfortunately, she's screwed either way because of the nature of the conditions she's in.
Yes.
Often that's the case for us. Again, it isn't fair. This would, in the ancient world, this makes perfect sense. It's abhorrent to us, but that's because we've got this modern idea of morality in there, where we think somehow we can make everything fair. But I don't think that's feasible. So how does that relate to my stuff? Well, you said about philosophy changing the world. I should say I don't think philosophers should set that bar. I have friends of mine who do hardcore metaphysics. There's limits to what they can do, right? So I worry about that as a general bar.
Yeah,
but I have always been very practically minded about philosophy.
Good.
For me, the issue is education and the intellectual virtues and their role in education. So, like prison education, done a lot of work with that, and over here too. But here, this educating for intellectual virtue, we're trying to get into the curriculum here. In fact, we've been doing it with a lot of success. I think this changes how people. I think this is like a liberatory conception of education.
Mm-hmm.
It frees the mind. It's what philosophy does well, but I think any education does well. Liberates people, helps them to think for themselves, treats them, gives them dignity, and treats them as ends in themselves that can flourish, and so on. Education, which treats people merely as repositories for useful knowledge and skills, I think that's dehumanizing.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a big believer in that and the liberatory power of education. That's something I've and it flows from my certainly the intellectual ethics that I subscribe to, not so much the theory of knowledge, but the intellectual ethics, which is virtue based. To see how it fits into the education system.
Yeah, that's a good point you make. Is a lot of these. One thing is that a lot of times I'll be thinking, man, you just have to be lucky enough to know, a good how to know a good ethical code. You have to be lucky enough to be raised with proper ethical teaching, and whether it's luck or not, you make a good point. If we have the opportunity to sort of share this knowledge and pass it down and sort of give people the basis to which they can jump off and be, as you said, flourish, then maybe the conversation of luck should just step aside and we can just do whatever feels like in our control. Earlier we were talking about whether we have free will or not. Well, it feels like we do. Whether we have control or not, well, maybe it feels like we have control. So it probably benefits us to act like we do. I have two more questions. One of them being, tell us a little bit about your new book, Tempting Fate. But before you answer that, maybe you can help me. And I'm being a little selfish here. I'm just curious what your perspective is. 3 or 4 days ago, I had my first debate. I'm not a rigorous debater. I'll argue with people about politics in real life in the backyard with a beer in my hand. But I was really passionate about, and I know a lot of the views I said about luck today are very incompatible with the one I'm about to say, but I'm trying to reconcile things right now epistemically. But I believe in normative ethics. I believe in universal ethics, and like I mentioned earlier, I'm a big Derek Parfit guy, and so I align with probably 80% of everything he's ever written. But I've basically, to to be quiet and allow you more time to talk here. I entered this debate with a Eastern Orthodox Christian, and the debate prompt was, can we have ethics without God? And I was arguing, yes, we can have ethics without God. And basically I was arguing, I don't know if you're familiar with Parfit, but basically he combines consequentialism, Kantianism, and then Tim Scanlon's view of contractualism, and he calls it the triple theory. And so I was arguing, yes, especially from the Kantian aspect of that, there's reason, and because we're humans and we're rational animals, as Kant would call us, we have access to reason, and reason gives us all those, whether it be consequentialist principles or deontic principles, whatever it be, we have these, we can know them as rational beings, and that can give us normative beliefs on how we should act and engage with the world. And his view was, the person I was arguing against, he still said you could not, it was impossible to get normativity or the ought from the is to say. And last thing I'll say about this is his position was that we use reason first to figure out that there's a God, and then once we use reason, we realize this couldn't exist without a God. So the presence of reason is a sort of it's called the transcendental argument for God. And so that was his position. But I'm curious, what position do you think you would lean towards? I mean, his position, the Eastern Orthodox position, is, I don't think it's the most common, but I'm curious, do you think I was wrong, or do you think that there's a better argument, or do you believe in normative ethics at all? I was talking to some other analytic philosophers, and they said, give up. We don't need to have objective normative ethics we don't need that. Just give up on that. And I thought, no, we do need to argue for this. This is important. But I'm curious I know this is a little off topic. I'm just curious what your thoughts are.
So I think there's some philosophical puzzles which are existential and some that aren't. So take vagueness. The problem of vagueness, I think, is a deep, deep problem. I don't know really. If I had to jump one way or another, I'd go. There's a certain view, Travis type view, I'd probably go for. But whichever way you jump, it looks like you've got to say something crazy. It seems like there's deep contradictions there. But as it were, not knowing the answer to that, or that there be no answer to that, it doesn't, as it were, undermine a meaningful existence. But other problems are existential. They, if the disputed phenomenon isn't present, then it seems my existence is absurd. Mm-hmm. And I think skepticism is like that. I think if we don't know anything, I think life is absurd. If it's just a pretense that we go around acting like we know stuff, we don't actually know anything. I think free will is another one. If we're not actually free, then this is all absurd. It's just an absurd sham. But the other one I think is objective morality. So I would say, I mean, sure, people, like they walk the walk. I just don't believe they talk. They talk the talk rather, but I just don't believe they walk the walk. It's just like when philosophers say they doubt everything. I don't think they actually do, as Wittgenstein says. Look at their actions, the certainties in their actions.
Yeah.
So I think we have these commitments. So if that's right, it's incumbent upon us to. So say like with free will, it's incumbent upon us to understand what freedom is, not in this atrophied sense philosophers talk about, but in its fullest sense, as it's understood in the ordinary language. This is the way it's understood in ordinary language. It's almost like a miracle. I don't know. It's like it's some magical thing that imbues our actions somehow. Same with morality. I think I know philosophers have this, again, atrophied sort of view about what it might be. I think if that doesn't interest me, that looks just as absurd. I want to make sense of how ordinary practices are okay as they are. How ordinary practices are infused with moral language of a pretty rich and robust kind. Do I have an answer? How to do that? No, I'm afraid not. But on your religious friend, I would say this. So one of the things I work on is epistemology of religious belief. I think the most credible views about... So I think religious belief can be rational, but I don't think what makes it rational is that kind of a priori grounding. That's the sort of Lockean aspiration. I mean, good luck with that. But I also don't think that fits the phenomenology of what it is to be religious. The religious life is a life of a certain kind of values, it seems to me. It's not that it goes back to the hinge type idea. I think to be religious is to have religious hinges operative in one's worldview. It's not, as it were, to reason all the way down and find God at the bottom. And indeed, if you look at the history of religious thought, that was a pretty dominant idea. Skepticism was at the heart of a lot of, there are mysteries of the faith and so on. Reason goes so far and then it stops. That's a pretty standard. It's what they call negative theology, or apathetic theology.
Yeah.
So,
well, I'm curious. I have. I'd be interested to. I mean, people who know me. I got my undergrad and my first master's degree were actually in theological studies, and then I said, you know what? I think this isn't answering the questions I'm really curious about, and that's what prompted me to go get my second master's in philosophy. And so I've sort of taken a step back from the religious world, and I've just been engaging in philosophy. And but yeah, I'm still sympathetic to the view, and it's sort of, I agree with you. You can hold these beliefs and you wouldn't be irrational. I think Richard Dawkins would call them delusional. But I have another question. Next Tuesday, they've invited me back to debate the same guy on conspiracy theories, because I sort of, near the end, I kind of puffed him because he started mentioning a lot of conspiracy theories. And, you come from you come from a more enlightened land, but you're in America now, and we have a lot of conspiracies here, and they make me very. I mean, if I'm being honest, I get very emotional because when I was younger, when I was in like middle school or junior high, I was actually a big 9/11 denier, and now I'm not, and I feel like on various sides of the political aisle, people get a little upset at me because I just don't believe a single conspiracy theory ever about anything. And so I'm pretty mainstream with that. But we can address the elephant in the room. It seems that right of center, there's a lot of conspiracy theories. Does your engagement with epistemology engage with conspiracism? Do you have anything to say about sort of what seems to be the erosion of truth, maybe worldwide, but in my lived experience here in America, it seems like we're getting to a place where you said if we don't have knowledge, everything's absurd or life is absurd. I'm not trying to be a doomer here, but it seems that we're headed that way sometimes. I'm scared of entering the place where we can't know everything. And I mean, my political side would say there's one side of the aisle doing this, but I won't go there. I'm just curious what you have to say about conspiracies.
Well, I think you're wrong about it being one side of the aisle. I mean, I think it's both sides of the aisle. Like, it seems every day there's like a left conspiracy about.
Sure.
Usually anti-Semitic conspiracy theories on the left. It's pretty common these days.
I meet a lot of Holocaust deniers. Yeah.
Yeah. So
it's terrible.
So yes,
terrible.
Even right now we've got the soccer going on. I don't know if you're watching the World Cup, but there's like a massive conspiracy about the referees going on with that. People think, which is you'd expect.
Yeah, it's depressing.
Epistemologists do have a lot of things to say about this. There is a view where, and it sounds like you might be getting there, that to believe conspiracy theories are always irrational or something like that. I don't think that's not my view. After all, some conspiracies are real.
They do turn out to be true.
And I think I'm Humean about this. I don't know if you know Hume on miracles.
Mm-mm.
So Hume has this classic discussion of miracles. He often gets misunderstood. Some people interpret him as saying miracles are impossible. He's not saying that. Some people interpret him as saying you can never rationally believe in miracles. He doesn't say that. What he does say, though, is quite specific. It's that given what we know about human beings, given what we know about miracles, these incredible events, so what we know about human beings is primitive cognitive psychology, where we know that people like to believe incredible things, right? And they like to be the person that passes on the credible thing, there's that. So given we know these facts and we know the miracles are these incredible events, if the only reason we have to believe it is that someone told you it, that's not a good reason, right? Mm-hmm. So the bar, it's not that you can't get knowledge from testimony, because of course you can. It's just knowledge of this particular kind you can't get just through testimony because of something about the features of it, its content and what we know about human beings. And I think you can apply that general reasoning to conspiracy theories. As it were, there's something about conspiracy theories that they raise the bar very high. I'll tell you a little story. When Charlie Kirk is what the Kirk guy when he got shot.
Mm-hmm.
I'd never heard of him. Suddenly there was this big thing. So I asked my teenage sons. I asked them, of course, they'd heard of him, and immediately they're like, yeah, but he's racist or whatever. And I said, well, okay, what? Tell me, can you send me some stuff? And they couldn't from the things. I'm sure maybe you had said to objection, but they couldn't. They ended up like, well, it's just what I'd heard, and I was like, when it comes to things like
That's not enough.
you don't. That's not enough, right? This is someone's character. Like you can't. Don't go. That's not what we do. It's not what we do in this house. We're epistemologists in this house.
Yeah,
we verify, and especially when it's something like so and so is a terrible human being or whatever, you verify, right? That's that, and I think okay. So there's certain kinds of things where I think we ought to raise our epistemic thresholds. Conspiracies are ones like that, and they also it's not that we also it's what the researchers call we should go horizontal as well as horizontal. You have a different angle of scrutiny. The idea is certain kinds of things you might verify by using the same kind of source, and that's okay because there's no, as it were, the thing that you're leaning on is not itself in doubt. But with conspiracy theories, because of the kind of thing it is, the source is itself in doubt as well. So that's why you need independent sources, corroboration, and so on. So you look for things for example, on I make a point with my Twitter of following people who I don't agree with.
Good.
I think this is a good thing and I encourage my kids to do this. You want people in your feed that you don't agree with, and you want to see what they say. And over time, you form a view about people, whether they're reliable, wherever they may be on the political spectrum, whether you agree with them or not, whether they're good informants. And then when something happens, what they say now has a bearing, right? This is a very Humean point. I mean, Hume's saying you could believe, if someone you've known for years tells you, and you trust, tells you there's a miracle, you can believe there's a miracle. But that's because it's not, as it were, your basis is now them. It's not, as it were, just the mere testimony or someone saying it's them, So I think that's the way it works with, there is a rational route to believing in conspiracies, but as it were, the burden is quite onerous. And one has to build in these checks and balances and so on. But if after all that, as I say, some conspiracies are real. If after all that the conspiracy survives, then you should stick with it.
Yeah. The last guest I had on my podcast was Michael Zimmerman, but it was Michael E. Zimmerman. And it's funny because I was trying to reach out to Michael J. Zimmerman, who writes about moral luck. And my email accidentally went to this Michael E. Zimmerman, but he was also an academic philosopher at Boulder, Colorado. And he emailed me back and he said, what?
It's a bit of a Gettier case almost.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And he emailed me back and he said, you got the wrong guy, but if you still want to have me on your podcast, here's what I do. And he sent me, he's faculty. He's now emeritus at Boulder, Colorado. And all of his stuff was on UFOs and extraterrestrials and Heidegger and all this stuff. And I thought, oh my gosh. So I've always been the guy of saying, no, there's no UFOs. There's we need to be mainstream. And so, but I had him on the podcast and I thought, oh, what am I doing? But he made a very compelling case for all these things. And, I walked away from that conversation more, not believing in aliens or not believing in UFOs, but just a little bit more epistemically humble of maybe I should stop being so immediately repulsed by these things. Because as you say, sometimes they turn out to be true. Yeah. I really enjoyed this conversation.
I was going to say on the UFOs, I've always been intrigued by the opposing thought, which is the fact that we haven't heard anything by now. Why isn't that a really good reason to think that the universe is empty? Not necessarily of life, but of intelligent life of a kind that could
the Fermi paradox, yeah.
Yeah, and actually, if the universe is empty, given its, that strikes me as that would be a spooky fact. If the universe is empty and it's just us, given its vast size,
Yeah.
I mean, let's suppose it could be proved tomorrow that there cannot be a habitable world or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I would find that very spooky.
Yeah. There's a wonderful quote. It said, either, we're alone in the universe or we're not. And both of these are terrifying.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, that's
yeah,
right.
I related to that. Yeah. Before we go, real quick, I think you have a new book. You emailed me about it, but unfortunately, my paper was pretty much almost completed. But you have a book, Tempting Fate. That's new, correct?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It comes
Tell us a little
out.
bit about. Tell us a little bit about that.
So I have these views about risk. In fact, they relate to luck, actually, because for
Mm-hmm.
me, risk and luck are counterparts. They're not quite the same, but they're basically differing. They differ in terms of perspective. So think about, someone nearly gets shot by a sniper. Let's say the bullet whizzes past their ear. So view from perspective after the event, they're lucky to be alive.
Mm-hmm.
View from perspective before the shot, there's a high risk they're going to die.
Mm-hmm.
So risk,
Mm.
as it were, is forward looking. Luck is sort of backward looking when the risky event didn't occur. And so, as you know, I have this modal view of luck. I think what makes an event lucky is that it has a certain fragility to it. It's
Relevancy.
it's not,
Yeah.
yeah, it's an event that it occurs, but it could so easily have not occurred. So
Mm-hmm.
a lottery win is a lucky event because although you won, there's as we philosophers say, close possible worlds. There are lots of close possible worlds right now where you're holding the losing lottery ticket because all that needs to change is a few coloured balls fall slightly different configuration. Boom, you're a loser. So luck has this fragility, and I think risk is the same. Risk has fragility, and that's how we measure luck. An
Mm.
event, what makes it risky is the fact the risk, what I call the risk event associated with that activity is very close. So my favorite example is the Alex Honnold, the climber, the free soloist. Do you know this guy? He climbed El Capitan, no ropes. He just did some
Wow.
tower in Taiwan recently. But like, it's amazing to watch it. Sheer rock face, no ropes, nothing to save him. And he's
Mm.
climbing there. You can watch. And it's terrifying.
And that's the image you have
And
on the cover of the book, if I'm
and that's
correct.
the image. Yeah, yeah. And in fact, I've corresponded with him about some of the ideas as well.
Mm.
Um, it seems to me that's inherently a high risk activity. And it's built into it, but it's high risk. If you know, certain kinds of activities you could eliminate the risk and it'd still be the same kind of activity, but not that.
Mm-hmm.
You bring the ropes in. Whatever you're doing with the ropes isn't what he's doing, right? What he's doing is built into it. But one of the questions I thought was interesting, like why don't we stop him, right? Why doesn't
Mm.
health and safety come in, like cordon off the mountain, Because you do. If I tried to do that, you'd do that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and think about ordinary lives. You have to wear seatbelts. You got to wear masks if in certain. There's all these kind of like health and safety is like a big thing that we reduce risk. But here's this guy hanging off, and we're filming it. We're not stopping it.
Mm-hmm.
We're filming it. We're applauding him when he gets to the top.
Mm-hmm.
And people do die free solo climbing. I mean, it is
Mm-hmm.
a very dangerous thing. And how do you make sense of that? And there's a certain view about risk which is probabilistic, which a lot of people have. And I just think on the probabilistic view of risk, you can't make sense of why we applaud this guy. The probabilistic view of risk just says, look, if it's likely he's going to die, for it to be risky means he's likely he's going to die.
Mm-hmm.
But if that's the case, then we definitely shouldn't let him on that mountain. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If that's what we think is going on here, we should stop him. It's morally incumbent upon us to stop him
Yeah.
because we don't think that at all. We applaud him, we admire him, we think it's life affirming what he's doing.
Yeah.
So I think we need to differentiate between. We have to understand how there can be activities that are high risk, like Honnold on the mountain, but nonetheless completely rational, and in fact, help one to flourish and so on.
A
And I
good
think we
analogy of
explain
this
that
would be someone playing Russian roulette. You would stop them.
exactly. So
Yeah.
the Russian roulette thing, like it's likely he's died, but it doesn't really serve any purpose and so forth. So
Mm-hmm.
I think what's going on. Here's what I claim is going on in the Honnold case on the free soloist. I mean, it's interesting. This whole documentary is called Free Solo. It won an Oscar. And the whole documentary is about the training, the preparation, meticulous, all the years that go into making him the kind of person who can climb this El Capitan that no one has done before in a free solo climb. Why is that relevant? It's not relevant because it gets rid of the risk. There is no getting rid of the risk. This kind of activity it is. He could easily die on that mountain. It's high risk. But it's not high risk because he's likely he's going to die. In fact, he's climbed that mountain a bunch of times. He didn't die. And he climbs lots of it. He's still alive. He's still going, 15 years, whatever, later, climbing all the time, have free solo. So it's not that he's likely he's going to die. What makes it risky, high risk, is the fact that there's a fragility built into whatever he's doing. Like it's built in. He could easily die at any moment. Right? That, he's not in complete control. the preparation and the training he does, that's what lowers the probability of death. But it's not the
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing that can get rid of the risk, because the risk is built
Yeah.
into the activity.
Mm-hmm.
So there are certain kinds of activity where, preparation and training can lower what I call the depth of risk, but they don't affect the level of risk at all. Right?
Huh.
The depth is how often you're going to die, as it were, in this case. But the level is just, could you easily die? Well, yeah, you could easily die.
Yeah.
And then you might think, well, that's a very abstract idea. But the point is, once you've got that in play, first you can explain why what he's doing is different to someone playing Russian roulette, right? I mean, we
Mm-hmm.
can build in a story about, the preparation and this is all rational ways, as it were, of reducing depth of risk. And that's what makes it reasonable to let him go, not let me go on the mountain, let him go on the mountain. And of course, we see there's a point to what he's doing as well, in the same way we don't with the person with the Russian roulette. But then I think we can start to apply this to our own lives too. I mentioned earlier the authenticity risk of, the Bernard Williams case.
Yeah.
And I think a similar thing is going on there. People have to make decisions. 10 years ago, I had to make a decision to move my entire family halfway around the world and come here.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know how things are going to turn out. But not just like Anna Karenina, not making these decisions can also be a disaster for your life. There are decisions we all have to make. We don't know how things are going to work out. How do we do them? The risk, as it were, the high risk is built in to the activity. What we can reduce, I think, is the depth of the risk. So it's a bit like Honnold with the meticulous preparation and so on. When we do all of our, we research and so on, what we're doing is we're reducing the depth, we're making it rational. So we have some idea of this is a risk that's taken for a purpose that's valuable. We've done the preparation and so on, so we've reduced the depth of the risk. But the one thing we can't do is eliminate the inherent riskiness of the activity, which is built into the fact that it is this this transformative experience that's about to be undertaken, where we're not sure what's going to be like on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what the book's about. It's called Tempting Fate because the idea is like we need the right theory of risks, so the thought goes, to make sense of how we could lead how risk can have a role to play in meaningful lives.
Yeah.
If you go for the probabilistic view, I think you'd end up with, it'd be like the health and safety idea.
Mm-hmm.
You should avoid risk, including the kind of authenticity risks that give life meaning. That's what you should do, right? Just like you should wear seatbelts and masks and sanitize your hands every time you come back from somewhere where you might have been exposed to germs and so on. But that misses out something I think deeply important about life, which we find in the Honnold case. I think risks can give life meaning, and in fact, I think they're essential to living authentic lives. And authenticity is essential to meaning.
I don't know if you encountered this, but what you just said reminded me a lot. I mean, again, I'm very young, so I have a good excuse, but I just haven't encountered Martha Nussbaum, if you're familiar. Oh my gosh. I mean, her whole library of books is just amazing. And I just got an email back from her. She's working on a book right now, so she can't come on the podcast, but I just discovered all of her works. But she wrote a book about luck, and it sort of escaped all my searches of books on luck. And so it just never found its way.
Fragility of Goodness? Is that one?
Yes, The Fragility of Goodness, yes. And
great book.
And so I immediately just ordered it because the small excerpts I read on JSTOR were amazing. But yeah, she talks about, sort of right in the opening, she talks about luck being almost the thing that gives life purpose. And that, I think her exact quote, I'm not gonna be able to do the exact quote, but she says, I'm a person, but I'm also a plant. And what she means by that is I'm a plant and I'm exposed to the wind and the climate and the weather and the bugs that come by and all these different contingencies and these dangers even. But it's in these dangers, sort of these contingencies, these matters of luck, that give my life purpose or meaning, or they sort of enrich my humanity, is sort of what I was getting at. I didn't read, but I mean, I immediately ordered it, so I'm regretting not finding all of her work way earlier. But yeah, it's the Fragility of Goodness, and it sort of ties into what you're talking about. Is if I imagine a world with no risk, I mean, I don't know what I couldn't even begin to imagine what it would look like, but uh, I don't know if I would want it. And
Mm.
so, yeah, I think you're right. So I'm excited to read your book, and I appreciate all the work you've done. You've been a really amazing academic, and you've contributed a lot. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for having me on the podcast. I really enjoyed talking to you, Jack.